Do those who believe in God fear death less than those who don't? The relationship between fear and religion is complex. Some would argue that religion originates from fear of death, or indeed from fear in general. However, I think human beings' earliest religious stirrings arise from missing knowledge and understanding. They are, in a sense, proto-scientific, and they in fact arise from the same forces that give rise to science, a need to understand the world. Human beings looked at the world around them and observed phenomena that they couldn't explain. The obvious explanation was that some unseen force analogous to human behaviour was causing these phenomena, much as we humans ourselves caused phenomena. This was, in a very real sense, a naturalistic explanation. As knowledge of the world advanced and alternative explanations for these phenomena became available, these non-human, invisible actors began to retreat from immediate view in the events around us and became more abstract. And these beings all men call gods, to paraphrase Thomas Aquinas. Fear certainly plays a part in this. If bad things happen that we can't explain, it's easy to attribute these to angry gods who should be feared and need to be appeased. But I don't think these religious beliefs necessarily originated from fear. The other way in which fear is sometimes related to religion is in the face of death. If people fear death, if they fear annihilation, then religious belief systems that offer some kind of wonderful life after death, and not all do, by the way, well, these may help to mitigate this fear. On the other hand, this can add a new element of fear if these views of the afterlife include some concept of punishment. So the present-day relationship between religion and fear, particularly fear of death, is likely to be quite complicated. One of the big questions concerns whether religious belief offers comfort to the dying. I guess, in a nutshell, is dying a less terrifying experience for those who hold religious beliefs than for those who don't? This is a very difficult question to answer and a difficult topic to research. There are studies of this or of closely related questions, and I've read some of these studies and also some of the meta-studies and reviews that offer an overview of the study results. However, I come away from those feeling more confused than informed. There's so much variation in the precise question being asked and in the definition of terms. I would like to see a study comparing people who strongly believe in God with those who strongly don't. I'm not aware of any such study. If you are, please let me know in the comments. But this may not even be the right question. Firstly, because there are all kinds of different understandings of God, so maybe we need to be more specific about this. But even if we are more specific, maybe what we really want is not so much people who believe in a God, but people who believe in an afterlife. Not all religious belief systems that include a concept of God necessarily include belief in an afterlife. Judaism certainly doesn't place this idea at the center of its belief system. And on the other hand, there may be atheistic ways of believing in an afterlife. Some atheists may view this in an entirely naturalistic way, as just some kind of continued existence. Or maybe it involves being uploaded to the cloud. Back in 1997 in the USA, members of the cult known as Heaven's Gate were willing to kill themselves because they believed that they were really aliens temporarily occupying a human body, and that they would be picked up by the passing mothership when they died. They weren't afraid of death. Most studies explore this issue with respect to a somewhat vague and general concept of religiosity, but the precise content of a belief system is surely going to have some impact on the answer to this question. Then there's the matter of what exactly we mean by fear of death. If we include fear of dying itself, for instance of any pain or discomfort that might involve, there's no reason to think that believers will fear this any less than non-believers. Let's use those terms for convenience. The same goes for any fears we may have about those we're leaving behind. So when I ask this question, I really have in mind the existential fear of death, the fear that one day I will no longer be, that I will leave this world. And of course, whether believers will experience fear in the face of this is likely to depend very much on what exactly they envisage the supposed afterlife to involve. I don't think any studies to date really shed much light on this issue. The results are at best ambiguous. Today I want to share with you a few ideas and maybe also a few expectations about what I imagine such research might reveal, as well as maybe pose some of the questions that we might usefully ask. What studies there have been tend to show some support for the idea that at low levels of religiosity, i.e. people who identify to some extent with a set of religious beliefs, but this remains largely external to them, that for these people, fear of death increases as religiosity increases. There's a positive relationship. However, among people with a high measure of religiosity, that means people who take their religious faith very seriously and who've internalized their belief system, so to speak, that for these people, fear of death may tend to decrease with increased religiosity. In other words, there's a negative relationship. That would mean that there is some threshold of religiosity beyond which fear of death decreases. So let's say from 1 to 5 on the religiosity scale, fear of death increases, while from 6 to 10 it decreases. This would lead to an inverted U-shaped curve. What I would like to see, though, is studies carried out at the extreme ends of this scale. In other words, a direct comparison between those who express zero religiosity with those who express high religiosity, say 10 on our imagined scale. I'm not aware of any studies that do this. Of course, even such studies as these would need also to take into account the specific kind of both belief and non-belief. It may be, though, that religious belief in its early stages, so to speak, causes the very fear of death that religious belief in its later stages mitigates. There is, of course, also the sober reminder that some belief systems can significantly increase the fear of death, particularly those involving punitive gods or fear of judgment. One cross-cultural study found that individuals who self-identified as non-religious reported the lowest levels of death anxiety, while Muslims reported the highest, and Christians, Hindus and Buddhists were somewhere in between. This very much suggests that the content of religious beliefs, rather than just holding religious beliefs per se, will certainly have some impact on whether or not a person fears death. The other problem with most of these studies is that they don't take into account other factors that may influence how much an individual fears death. Perhaps there are some personality types that are more inclined to fear death than others. Maybe some life experiences can reduce the fear of death if, for instance, death is something we deal with on a regular basis. Or maybe we practice some form of stoicism, consciously or unconsciously, in which case death is just something to be accepted. Or maybe we're so scared of living that dying doesn't bother us much or demand much of our attention. That's also another factor that may enter into the equation, how much we actually think about death. Finally, something I suspect is this. It's not religious belief per se that reduces fear of death, but the sense of having a purpose, of living a meaningful life, wherever we derive that meaning from. Having a coherent and firm worldview, regardless of its religious or secular nature, can help to mitigate the fear of death by giving life a sense of purpose and reducing this level of existential anxiety and uncertainty. Belonging to a community of like-minded people may also contribute to a reduction in fear. I'd very much like to see more exploration of these questions.